Welcome to tutorial number 4 of the Fall and Dodge or Fall and Catch series. In this tutorial we're going to talk about some of the additional elements that can be added to the game. The first one will be more objects falling down when you reach a certain milestone in the game. Once we reach 10 right here, you can see we go from 3 objects falling to now we have 4. Sort of an increasing level of difficulty. There's also going to be another perk that's added. You can see here at 30 we have this golden apple that falls down, and if we catch it, our rabbit becomes smaller. And you can see we have this timer on the upper right hand corner that tells you when your 10 seconds are up and when your rabbit gets a lot bigger. Right? We only have a couple of these coded. We actually coded them pretty early in the game. You can change the numbers around based on what you want. But we'll start back here where we left off last tutorial. So by now we should have a score variable that counts for when all the apples hit the ground, and a lives variable that counts for whenever our rabbit gets hit by one of these apples. And then of course if we ever have our lives equal 0, we have our game over that comes up. That was all covered in the previous tutorials. So let's start going now with our increasing level of difficulty. We're going to want, we have 3 to start, and we're going to want to have a 4th apple come down when we reach a milestone in the game. Typically, I would say you probably got a score of 50 or so. For testing purposes, we're going to make it 10, just because we want to be able to see it much quicker. So we'll go down here to our apple 3, and we'll duplicate, and we'll make apple 4. We do not need to change the score and lives for each one of these things whenever we reset. So we will keep this here because we want it to fall into the cycle, but not until our score reaches 10. So we will say for every time this is clicked, in the beginning of the game, this is going to be hidden. And that's going to be hidden until we get to be a score of 10 or above. So we'll go into our control and we'll say forever hidden. And if our score is above 10, we're going to show it. So first we're going to need our operators. And for our variables, our score is going to have to be above 10. All right, again, for regular gameplay, I'd say 50, but for testing purposes, 10 is good, so we don't have to play the game for 30 seconds in order to see if it worked. All right, so after our score of 10, we want to make our look say that we're going to show this thing. Then we'll just fall right back into this whole loop, and everything's going to be the same, right? If our Y position is at the bottom, reset to the top, and if we're touching the rabbit, change our lives and go back to the top and start our cycle over again. The one thing I would change in here is to not be consistent with the other apple that's falling. Instead of -7, we can go, I don't know, -7.5 or whatever you want it to be. If you want it to be an easier apple, we can go with something else, but just make it different than what the other apples are so they don't sync up to their fall rate. All right, let's see how we did here. So we're at 1, 2, 3, and when our score is 10, this thing should show up and start falling, which it is. Right now we have 4 apples falling down on the screen, and our level of difficulty of this game is increasing as our gameplay continues. I would recommend having multiple ones of these. I think a good measurement would be another one shows up at 50, another one shows up at 100, another one at 150, and so on and so forth. So those would just be individual sprites you would keep adding. One for 50, one for 100, one for 150, and so on and so forth. So it would just be a matter of duplicating, and I would duplicate the ones that have that delayed show on them so you don't have to hunt for all these commands in here again, and just changing this number up here. Alright, for right now, I'm going to take this and I'm actually going to make it 50, and that way we can code in our next item, which is going to be that golden apple that falls down and makes our rabbit become smaller. Alright, so we are going to go back up here to apple number 1, and we're going to duplicate it, and we're going to call this one the golden apple. Alright, so we have our golden apple. So we're going to use a lot of these commands that we found before with it falling and resetting to the top of the screen. So we'll leave all of this stuff here right now, but of course some things are going to look a lot different. Starting with our costumes, if you notice from my example before, when the apple was falling down, it was blinking. So let's make that first. So we'll duplicate this costume right here, apple 1 and apple 2. We'll fill this in with some type of gold or yellow color. and then we'll have it cycle back and forth between these two costumes. Alright, so we have Apple 1, Apple 2, and in our code we can just say that when this thing is showing up, it's going to cycle back and forth between those two to make it look like it's blinking. So we'll say forever. In our looks, just go to next costume, and we want to have a very small delay in between each one of these. You can make it whatever you want, but we'll go with 0.1 for now, and we'll just see how that looks. Alright, so you can see it is blinking right here, so that's probably going to be about what we want. Alright, so let's get down to it. We want this thing to show up at a certain score, and then we want it to drop down, and then we're going to have it do different things. Remember, this is going to be the good apple, where if we touch it with the rabbit, then we want it to make our rabbit smaller. So we will have to mess with a lot of things down here, but we still want all of those triggers in place. Alright, so we'll say when the flag is checked, we want to hide this thing, right, because it doesn't show up in the beginning of the game. Alright, and then we're going to say if our score equals a certain amount, then we're going to have this thing drop down. So we will say forever. If our score is going to be, let's actually just say 10 for right now. We can change it for gameplay, but for right now, for testing purposes, we'll make it nice and quick so we can see it happen. So if our score is above 10, we are going to show this thing. All right, then we're going to have it drop down from the top. All right, so pick a random from the top. We're going to have this thing start to drop down. -5 is fine. And rather than have to nest this thing in here, we can even just put in another when this flag is checked. That way it'll just be doing that over here. We don't have to worry about that being in here messing with any of our commands. So when the flag is checked, it's going to be cycling back and forth between next costume. We won't see it until our score of 10 anyway, but it will be doing that behind the scenes. Alright, change Y by -5. When our Y position reaches the bottom, we don't want this to increase our score. We just want it to, that means we missed it if we hit the bottom, which is a bad thing, but it's, I guess a better way to say is it's just not a good thing. We don't want it to increase the score. We don't want it to decrease lives. We kind of just want it to do nothing at that point if we miss it, and just have it hide itself. Now if it's touching the rabbit, again, not a bad thing. That's a good thing that we want. So we're going to have it hide again, but we're also going to want to have it now trigger the rabbit to be small for a certain amount of time. Right now we're in the golden apple sprite, so in order to link an event happening here to a different sprite, I think our broadcast is going to be the best thing that we do. So we will broadcast a new message, and we'll just call it golden apple. Alright, so we caught the golden apple. The golden apple is hidden, and now let's just see where we're at for right now. So after 10, the golden apple should fall and we should be able to catch it. Alright, there it is, and we can catch it. Cool. Alright, then we broadcasted golden apple, and everything else seems to be happening as we want. Alright, so when we broadcast that message, we will go back here to our rabbit, and we can say when I receive the message golden apple, we're going to decrease the size of this thing. Right now we're at 50. Maybe we'll make it half of that, which would be 25. So when I receive golden apple, change size by 10. We can say change size by -25. All right, then we're going to be moving around. We want to wait, we'll say 10 seconds. Then we want the size to be back up to where it was before. So we can say change size by 25. Alright, cool. So we are a small rabbit right now running around, and everything looks to be the way we want it. Alright, a couple other things just to mention here. If we happen to have our lives less than 0 when our rabbit was small, that would mean that we would start the next game and our rabbit would be small, and if we got the golden apple again, our size would be 0. So we want to make sure right here that in the beginning of each game, we set our size to the size where we normally are. If it was 50% before, great. If it was smaller, it's now back to 50%, so we have that, and we know we always start the game, the rabbit's going to be at 50% size. Another thing we're going to want to have here is, if you remember, that timer showed up before. Okay, so in order to add in the timer up here for our golden apple, we're actually going to make a variable and just call it the golden apple timer. Right, so we have our golden apple timer, which comes up right here. You can name it something better, but we'll just go with that for right now so we all know exactly what it is. Alright, and we want to have this timer pop up, and we want to have it count down from 10 for our 10 seconds that we're going to be small, and then of course when we reach 0, that means our rabbit goes away and our perk is all done. So we'll put in another receive golden apple right here, and when you receive golden apple, we want to show this golden apple timer. Then we want to have it decrease from 10 down to 0. So we'll set golden apple timer to 10. Then in our control, we're actually going to use our repeat. And we'll have this thing repeat 10 times. We're going to decrease our golden apple timer by 1. So change golden apple timer by -1. And in between each one of those, we'll just be waiting 1 second. Then finally, when we reach the bottom, we'll hide this thing. So we'll go back to variables here, and we will hide golden apple timer. All right. In the beginning of every single game, we won't have this thing because the golden apple doesn't show up until 10 seconds. So we'll say in the beginning of every game, we'll hide it in case it was there before. If it was already gone, it'll just tell it to do the same thing that it's already doing. So we're going to decrease 10 times all the way down to 0. Cool. All right, so that is pretty much exactly what we want it to be doing. I would encourage you to take these. If you want to copy them exactly, you absolutely can, but I would suggest making them a little bit different. Make them your own, and you can, of course, have these things repeat several times throughout the game that you're playing. I don't know how long you... I think a good number to get in your head is to think about how long do you want somebody playing this game for until it becomes so impossible that you're only going to have about 10 seconds before your score gets down to 0. If you want someone to be able to play your game for 10, 15, 20 minutes, then maybe don't add in so many apples falling down. If you want somebody to have a minute playing your game and then they're done, you should have a lot of these apples increase very, very quickly. So it's up to you. It's your game. Get a vision in your head of where you want it to be at the end, and do your best to work towards it.